Pride, tradition, excellence. We, the people. We, the Washington Tattoo.
Greetings, I'm Mark Riley, and welcome to the Washington Tattoo podcast, where the world's musical traditions come to life. The Washington Tattoo is an international music and arts festival coming to the Washington, D.C. metro area. Our podcast explores the lives and stories of world-renowned musicians, dancers, producers, choreographers, artists, educators, arts advocates, and those who serve our cultural communities at large. For more information and donations, find us at www.thewashingtontattoo.com. Now please enjoy this episode of the Washington Tattoo podcast, sharing the power of the arts, one story at a time. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode number 1 of the Washington Tattoo podcast. We are absolutely humbled and honored that our first interviewee is Brigadier Sir Melville Jameson from the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo. So Sir Mel, as we love to call him, is the senior advisor for the tattoo, and just before the COVID pandemic hit all of us, our team from the Washington Tattoo had an incredible meeting with production managers Claire Whelan and Steve Small at the Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. So we figured that it would be appropriate that we would want to honor our relationship with the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo and say thank you to them, and launch our podcast when historically the Edinburgh Military Tattoo would be starting its rehearsals and getting things underway. So folks, please enjoy this episode number 1 with Brigadier Sir Melville Jameson. Greetings, everyone. Here we have Brigadier Sir Melville Jameson, who's the former producer of the world-famous Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, now in the role of senior advisor, and also works and advises with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her birthday celebration, the Basel Tattoo, as well as a consultant for the Washington Tattoo, and is the owner of Melville Jameson Productions. So you, sir, are a consummate professional. You're a gentleman. You're an inspiration to myself and so many others around the world. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
It's an enormous pleasure, Mark, and I'm delighted to join you in Washington, as we've been isolated in Highland pasture for some time now.
Excellent, excellent. So I always like starting off the conversation about inspiration, because I think that's really what starts to drive us and guide us on our path and our journey. And so I know what my first big inspiration was for me, but I'm always really interested in other professionals' first inspiration. So who would you say be your first inspiration and why?
Well, I think I have to say that because I was sent away to boarding school quite at an early age, which is normal in this country, I think my inspiration behind all this, my life, has to be my mother and my father, because they were incredibly tolerant of my extremely bad reports at school, and always encouraging, and actually encouraged me very much on the musical side. Although I was never a great professional at anything, I was better at the bagpipes than anything else, but I played the piano, the violin, and the banjo, those sort of things at one point in my life. And they were my inspiration. And of course, I had a very high regard for my father, who had served all the way through World War I, the Black Watch, and survived. And so he was obviously a bit of a hero as far as I was concerned. And so from an early age of around 13, 14, I was absolutely determined to join the army. And I'd already worked out pretty well which regiment I wanted to join, whether they would have me or not. So that's where it really started, music and the military.
Wow. That's incredible. I had no idea that your father was in the Black Watch. I mean, that's one of the most historic regiments, I think, in existence.
Played at the White House for JFK, I think. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, and it was incredible. So, I mean, being a part of the tattoo scene and knowing about the Black Watch, when was your first tattoo experience?
Well, it happened quite early on, actually, because when I got to my regiment, illegally at the first dinner, formal dinner, someone said, "Why don't you play your pipes?" So I slipped out of the dining room, went round the table and out the door. And after dinner, the adjutant said, "I want to see you on the office, in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, and I thought I was going to receive a massive rocket. But in fact, the commanding officer of the day said, I just arrived in the regiment. I want you to be, to look after the pipes and drums. I want you to visit them every day. I want you to go wherever they go. Mm-hmm. And so, cut a long story short, I did all those things. The biggest trip I went on in my early years was around the United States with Saw Europe Productions. It was a tattoo called the British Tournament of Tattoo. It was not one of the best ones, I can assure you, that I was involved in, but we went everywhere, all around the place. And it was a great experience for me. But again, it's a story in itself. I think what I learned from it, I learned a lot of what to do, and certainly what not to do, what turned on the audiences and what left them half asleep. And I learned those things very early on. And of course, the pipes and drums of the Greys, it was then, and the Gordons who were with me, did a lot of, I think, audience pleasing.
I love that. That's one of the big questions a lot of people have is, what are the lessons learned? And you hope that you have some good lessons learned early in your career and instead of later in your career, but you'll always have lessons learned. But so would you say that that would be one of your first experiences with truly looking at a production of a tattoo?
Yes, absolutely, because I was involved. I was involved in the production of this as a sort of young officer, as a captain. So I was involved in the program, I guess, and very much rehearsals. You see, I suppose we had a mouse, pipes and drums with the two regiments, well, with our two military bands of 100. That was my own little bit, but we had all sorts of other things. In America, it was called, I think it was they called it the traveling circus. We had dogs and all sorts of things, police dogs. But it was spectacular. And I would say one thing, that I came away not only seeing the spectacular country, particularly in the South. I was crazy about Texas and Arizona. I rode out west and south, but how kind and friendly and welcoming all the people were around the whole of the States. I mean, it was just incredible.
That's great.
A warm feeling, yeah.
That's one of the things I always love about the idea of the tattoo is it brings so many folks together. So I definitely have that question later on in the interview, but so one of the things I love to ask and talk about is service and service to one's country, service to one's community. And I feel that you're probably one of the most servant-driven individuals that I've ever met. So was that something that you learned pretty much from a young age from your father? Where did that idea and that feeling of service come from?
Well, I am certainly very keen on this particular subject. And from a very early age, I think because of my mother and father again, and I had an enjoyable upbringing here. I was crazy about home. I learned about, certainly I was patriotic from an early age. I mean, we were all spellbound by the royal family, of course, in those days. And I remember seeing the Queen Mother driving past near my home here, my first look at a royal. And of course, we were glued at an early age to the Queen's coronation, 1953, with our first black and white television. And so from an early age, I was certainly patriotic. And then joining my regiment was a huge education. And this is an education which sadly, those who are not in the military don't get, because serving with our soldiers is an experience in itself, and it teaches you to put self last. We're always last to eat. We'll always make sure that soldiers are being well looked after. And that is, I think, one of the first lessons one learns about service. And all I can say is that anybody who treats Scottish soldiers badly doesn't survive very long. You soon know you've done something wrong. So a great lesson. So I think it was a mixture of home and a mixture of, certainly the regiment taught me an awful lot in my life. There's no doubt about that.
Excellent. We're going to speak about stories in a little bit as well, but that's one of the things I really do love about your story is that the patriotism you have and the heart of service that you have is all connected. And I definitely believe there's part of it in each of us from, you know, how we're brought up. There's pieces of it that are in our DNA. And I think, you know, when we surround ourselves with those types of people who think collectively about serving other people, you really have a great community that does a lot for others, and that does influence, you know, not just our local community, but the world.
Yeah. I think the same, well, we say the same about our soldiers, because they would be recruited, like yours, from sometimes very poor backgrounds, who were probably one parent families, if that. And when they came to the regiment, I found that they found a home, they found a welcome, they found a job which they started to enjoy, and they found a mission. You know, they got better and better, and of course many did so well. Nearly all of them would put their Queen and Country motto, service to their country, beyond anything else. And that's what I suppose military like yours and mine is about. Right. So it's great for them. It was not only good for me, but it was good for them too.
Well, excellent. I mean, I feel like the power of music and the power of service have a really strong bond when combined together. So, I mean, you've seen this with audience members, you've seen it with performers. Could you speak to the connection that you feel music has to like the human soul and the spirit of people?
Yes, I'm always, I think most people don't really understand the power of music and the influence of music. And when I was at the Tattoo, having a sort of rather what I would call a punter's ear for music, I like to think I had an ear for music, which was like the sort of music I liked was the sort of music that my audience hopefully liked. So, but it was extraordinary, the influence of music. It goes unnoticed sometimes. People go away and you say, well, that was that. But as my wife says, if you've got the music right, they're singing it on the way down the street. They're remembering it. And I believe that the Tattoo was a fantastic platform for giving people an opportunity to feel proud of their country. It didn't matter, in the case of Edinburgh, you could feel proud of any of your countries, because we were playing quite a lot of international music. Proud of your country, proud of yourselves, and also it was an opportunity to make people feel emotional, and they certainly do. We played them, I'll come on to, but I mean, Amazing Grace is probably the prime example. And also fun and enjoyment and dancing, and you know, and of course we fast and furious music, which we can do on the bagpipes as well. But a lot of the acts we got were fast moving because keeps people's attention, and
Yeah.
so I think it has an awful lot to do. But it's not just the Tattoo, of course. For you and I, in the military regime, it's our marching music that stirs the soul, and in the evening it's the lament, as we would call it, as the flags go down and you feel sad and moved. I'm feeling moved as I speak about it. And when people see the Lone Piper over Edinburgh Castle, I hope they're feeling moved by that. So it's a story in itself, and you're absolutely bang on that music. With the Tattoo, it's not just music, because it's spectacle. There's no point giving them a spectacle without the music. And that's why you've got to get the music right. And that is something that tattoos around the world don't always do. People don't always get it right, and leave people feeling sort of dull or asleep or something. I played a great classical piece in my first year at Edinburgh in 1995. I won't mention it because I love it. And I thought the more audience would like it, but it was just too slow and And we're not there to teach them classics, we're there to give them a really enjoyable time. So I was always learning.
I love that. My current commander always says that you hope. See, what does he? How does he put it? He says, "You don't want to educate your audience and hope that they're entertained."
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the whole idea of music, is when you're able to perform and you can receive that instant feedback from what you're performing and how they're reacting to that performance. That's such a magical feeling. And I always feel that, you know, when you have that married up to the backdrop of the Edinburgh Castle, and you have this feeling and the visual and the sound, it's just this explosion of the senses. And that to me is always really inspiring to see.
I think the other lesson that tattoo producers learn, have to learn quite quickly, is that one gives them a little of what they like, because we want them wanting more. So we keep it, and you, of course, in the old guard are very good at that, because your act and also the United States Army Drill Team, they're short and incredibly impressive, and people go, wow, and they want more, and it's gone.
Yeah,
I think it's quite important. Yeah.
No, that's excellent. And so we talked a little bit about this, but the connection between music and people, I mean, locally in Edinburgh, the tattoo is iconic. I mean, it's iconic around the world as well, but I mean, there's definitely a lot of local flavor. What is the connection, or what is the relationship like with the tattoo in the city of Edinburgh itself?
Well, it's very powerful since the end of World War II, when there were things, pipes and drums and dancing going on the Esplanade of Edinburgh Castle, just in the evenings, informally. And then it was formalized with the big one, first big one, 1950. And ever since then, along with the International Festival, and later on the Fringe, and later on other festivals that joined the bandwagon, Edinburgh's made a particular place in August for this very important happening. Hardly surprising, because it's hugely good for the local economy. But it also, although all Scots don't naturally go, we couldn't see them all, but they feel very proud, I hope, of what we do. And we would call it also probably the flagship for Scottish tourism in Scotland. I mean, people who come to Scotland from the States or wherever, hopefully take the tattoo in on their way if it's the right time of year. And they get really good flavour of Scotland and where we stand in the show that we produce. And of course, with one of the greatest backdrops in the world.
Yeah, and I hear it all the time. Even people who are not musicians and just folks who are not involved with the arts, when they say they travel to Scotland, the first thing that they mention is they either went to the tattoo or they just missed it. And so it's literally, I mean, it sells itself, but it's such a powerful event that always people reference Scotland, and the tattoo is always coming right after the word Scotland.
And I used to think very carefully when I was putting the program together, the acts and the music of the people that would be visiting us from abroad as well. So I wanted them to have, to make sure they were enjoying and of course felt welcome. And our narrator hopefully did that very well at the beginning of the show, who's still there instead.
He's incredible.
Yeah. So Alistair Hutton, who done such a fantastic job, yeah.
So, I mean, so broadening that conversation, so the local community, obviously massive impact, and then for the UK, I would imagine also a larger impact, and then the world after that is even more, right?
Yeah, the figures tell the story, really. Scotland, 6 million people, England, 60 million, probably both increasing as I speak. And so who comes to the tattoo? Well, last time I looked at the figures, we're probably about 20% from Scotland, 50% from across the border in England and Wales and Ireland, who we will warmly welcome. And then around 30% from the rest of the world, which is quite a big proportion, much bigger than the International Festival, which is 75, 80% local. So we're drawing in, which is wonderful. I mean, it couldn't better. A huge crowd of people from abroad and filling our 225,000 seats all up every year.
Amazing.
And touch wood, in recent years it's been sold out.
That's incredible. And I mean, that's all everyone right now. We're super excited to see, what happens next. We're in a challenging time now, but we know the goal is to come back to a normal, even if it's an adapted normal, getting back to live events and being in the midst with other folks and live music and live scenery. And I know that we're all really excited about that. So you've done a lot of traveling in your tenure. You're still traveling quite a bit. So one of the things I'm always interested in too are folks that have, a seasoned travel resume. What do you do to keep your batteries charged? What are some things that you have to keep yourself going, inspired?
Well, I think the adrenaline is there for starters, because I'm so excited about visiting the countries I'm visiting, because I've got plans to bring them or to see them, and hopefully I can bring them. So I think that's the first thing. I mean, I turned out to be quite a good traveler, so I couldn't sleep on the airplane. Normally after a reasonable quantity of wine, depending on the length of the flight. So I think a mixture of, I think the army taught me, we call it stamina, to be able to go on. Mind you, when I come back, for a week, I'm absolutely headed. So yeah, but while I'm on at work on the travel bit, it's great. And I've done some weird, long flights. I think the longest I flew was from. I was coming into Auckland, and I normally went across to LA via some of the wonderful South Pacific islands, which is another story. But I brought them as well, Tonga, Cook Islands, and Fiji. But I went from Auckland that day all the way down to Chile in South America. And I think it was a record for me. It was something like a 15, 16-hour flight, and it was very long all at once. And now I think they're doing 20-hour flights from the United States to England. But no, it's not that long, but from Australia to it, that's right. So that was the longest flight. And but when I got to Chile, he said, the defense attaché met me, and he said, a lovely Land Rover Discovery, and he said, you've got two choices, Brigadier. One is to go to a hotel and recover from your very long journey, or would you like to come and have lunch in the Andes? So I said, I think the latter. Of course, Chile is another story, but we had a great visit there. Yeah, and,
that's incredible.
So many happy memories. But it was, I think I was just so sort of passionate about the show, engaged with the and engaged with the people who were coming and were about to come, that it was, I felt it quite easy.
And I love that, because I mean, that's really that expanding of that sphere of influence, and the folks that have kind of the same, and I take this from Eric Juilliard, my good friend, this idea of heart blood and believing in this project, or believing in the purpose with all your heart, into and learning about other people, and that idea of constantly learning about other cultures, other music. Yeah, I think that to me is one of the most inspiring things that we can be a part of with the international music scene.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Juilliard's past master at all of this, and indeed to traveling as well.
Because sometimes a little scary and dangerous, but yes, master at it for sure.
And his tattoo is, as you know too well, magnificent.
Absolutely. So I'm sure, just like all of us, we go into a rut, or we get stuck, and sometimes we're not feeling inspired. And you alluded to it earlier a little bit about having kind of that resilience from the Army and being able to kind of pick oneself up. Could you share maybe a book or a quote or something like that with our listeners that would, when you think about being stuck, this kind of helps you out?
Well, I thought about quite a difficult one, really, but I always think about Winston Churchill. Most of us back here anyway, who my age would think Churchill was certainly a bit of a hero, a full-time hero for me, certainly. I think an extraordinary man in every way. So I think he's inspirational. And I looking back, I remember his quote during the difficult times when the British Empire was going alone, all by itself, and had a difficult time at Dunkirk, which is an understatement. But had done it incredibly, probably the finest example of a withdrawal that's ever been. Saved 300,000 people from Europe as they came off.
Right.
And the Desert War and stuff. And then one of his great quotes was Churchill, which is a bit on the rude side, but he says, keep buggering on. And that's what one does when one is slightly in the doldrums, is to have the courage and the stamina again to keep buggering on when things are looking pretty bad. And you will know that when you're having some of these down moments, people are coming, they're not coming in droves to help you. You're suddenly left with the problem and you've got to deal with it.
Yep.
So that's when it goes badly. A politer expression for that would be keep plodding on. But that's what he said, and that's one of his famous quotes. But I always think that which affects me is the quote from John Kennedy, JFK, which is always moved me, and I quote many times when I'm speaking about this sort of thing. And it should be written on every flag in Britain today, at least, and across Europe, and across the world, really. And that was, ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And don't rely, brackets, on the welfare state. You've got to do your bit. And a lot of people, I'm afraid, need to learn that lesson, probably.
Well, and I had written a note down about this as well, because I mean, for me, I think that when we talked about community and the connection of the power of music and the sense of identity that can come from music and things like that, I think it's always about a story. It's you have a story, I have a story, the community has a story, a collective story, and the combination or the collections of those stories start to build a tradition. And so when I took some notes on this and was thinking about the strong traditions built in Scotland over the last several hundred years, and that's built this really strong tradition. And so what I'm wondering always about are, what are the stories of individuals today moving forward collectively, and what type of tradition does that do to help society or to kind of take society away from things? And no society is ever perfect. I mean, we all know we always have challenges everywhere we go. But I think the collective stories of individuals, especially if it comes from an idea of service and a servant's heart, which is what you and I firmly believe, really helps to bring together the positives from a very negative situation. And I love that quote from Churchill, because you're never going to have a perfect situation. And we know it in the music industry. We know it in the business. There will always be a problem. And it always takes those people to just say, you know what, there's a problem. I have to do something about it, because if I don't do it, potentially no one else will do it. And so you try to find those folks to build that connective power and that idea of service, and then you break it down to the individual story. And people talk about it as a emotional bank account, and the idea of the exchange value from what you're giving as a service or a servant versus what you're taking. And that's something I always think that's really important for an organization like the Tattoo, or a city like Edinburgh, or a country like the UK or the US, that we have to really think about our collective story and how we're serving and helping other people.
I think people people have to have confidence in what they believe in. Because if you don't, then in case of running a show like the Tattoo, because you have to go slightly outside the box sometimes, see if that act's going to please people. Because you may not know, and many times I didn't know whether it would please people or whether they would write it off. So, I mean, I think one has to have confidence about what you're doing, and that helped me a lot. I mean, there were sleepless nights running up to a show, I can assure you, as to how it would go down with my audience. But normally it was okay.
So I think one of the great stories I love to kind of visit here is the story of Top Secret. They're near and dear to my heart as well, I know to you, but they were not always as popular as they are today. So I know that you had a pretty good hand in figuring out how to get them to Edinburgh. So could you talk a little bit about just that initial story with Top Secret and the Edinburgh Tattoo?
Yes, it's a wonderful story, actually, because whenever I was out and about around the world, I was looking for acts, obviously, and I had the pleasure of attending the Nova Scotia Tattoo calendar every year since the very beginning. The very beginning, Ian Fraser, the producer, who'd been doing it for a long time, ran me up, who I knew well from the Canadian Black Watch, and he said to me, "You will need my help," because I was a novice, well, nearly. And sure enough, he was incredibly helpful. And I remember one of the shows, it was something like 2001, it would be probably. I was watching with Steve Walsh, my production manager, and we saw this drumming group at the backstage. It was at the back of the auditorium, so we couldn't see it up front. And it was doing this incredible drum act. It was only a small group in those days. I got it right, I think it was 6 or 7, and they were throwing drumsticks, and it was just incredible, the whole movement. I had my binoculars on them. And so I asked Ian Fraser if we could see the person who ran that group after the show. So he came to the reception, and over a glass of wine, I said to him, that was an amazing performance. Would you consider coming to my tattoo? And he looked at me and he said, for a pause, he then said, "Do you mean the tattoo?" That's very well done, Eric. I said the Edinburgh Tattoo, and he said, I certainly would. And I said, "You've just got 2 things to do. I'll give you 2 years, but you have to grow the group so it's big enough to feature at the Esplanade," and that was up to be about 20. And that you'll have to come up with an act of about 6 minutes, 4 to 6 minutes, and you'll be seen by 100 million people around the world, or something. So that was the last, and I had such confidence in Eric. I didn't even go and see it in its production. So when Top Secret came to Edinburgh in 2003, when it came onto the arena, on the Esplanade, that evening, that first night, it came on sideways, by the way, that first one. They were sidestepping, and it just blew the audience away. It blew us away too. I mean, everybody was blown away. That was one of the few acts in my living memory that one could say that about. And of course, they've gone from strength to strength. I mean, they've been to the tattoo many times, been to our tattoos in Australia and New Zealand many times, and they've been at most other people's tattoos as well. So they're international. I was very pleased that the final thing we were able to orchestrate from a British point of view was that I invited Top Secret to come to the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebrations a couple of years ago. And the director of Windsor agreed, but they were going to be late. And I said, "It doesn't matter, they're so professional, they don't need rehearsal." And it was so good that the Queen saw them separately again play at Windsor Castle. And on top of that, at the reception at the end of the year to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee, the final one for the people who've been helpful to her, Top Secret was asked as a secret cabaret act for that reception. And Eric invited all Top Secret to meet Her Majesty the Queen. So it was brilliant.
Wow.
So that for me was a real high point, because that's what they deserved. They deserved the biggest accolade I could give them.
Mm-hmm.
It was that.
That's incredible. I remember, I mean, it was one of the first years I was in my military career is when I got to meet you in Australia, and it was with Top Secret. That was a very powerful event for me, because I went down there and I got to see how another country does patriotism, how another country does, and I was in my young 20s at the time. And I remember just being so awestruck with this idea of how to unify people. So I think Top Secret, when we talk about drumming and the visual impact and everything else, I mean, there's got to be no greater honor than to meet Her Majesty.
Yes, we think so. She's a mere 94 this year, maybe 95.
Incredible. So another incredible story that I know that you're a part of as well is the Royal Scots Dragoons Guards and the albums on Universal Music. And that was, to me, I remember coming back. I don't remember when I first heard those albums, but I mean, it's well over a decade ago. And I remember hearing how traditional music was incorporated with modern instrumentation and technology. And it was a really powerful sound to me. So could you talk about just how some of those ideas came about?
Well, extraordinary. I have to go back a bit, if you don't mind, because when I was in charge of both bands, by this time we remember it, 1971, the Scots Greys were amalgamating with another regiment called the Carbineers, and we came together to form the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, part of Defence Scots. So our name became the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards. And the commanding officer said he wanted me to arrange a record to put our military music together so that people would know what, all the military music tunes of the regiment. And because we had a bit of spare, what had happened was the Pipe Major, Tony Crease, had come up with Amazing Grace, which we all heard Judy Collins sing, of course. And so I had it arranged by the bandmaster, who was reluctant. And we played it once in the practice room, and everybody was staggered by it. So at the recording for all the other bits of music, done by RCA Records, by the way,
wow.
It was slipped on with one take at the end of the recording session, Amazing Grace, along with Going Home from Dvorak's New World Symphony. So it's a long story, I'll try to keep it short. Months passed, Radio 2, British BBC, played it once, and it had a massive mailbag. And BBC rang up RCA and said, "You've got a major hit on your hands, you better do something about it." But within a few weeks, we went from 741, knocked out people like Mick Jagger, and we were #1 for 6 weeks, which meant that I was taking the band of 50 Scots Dragoon Guards to the top of the pop studios to perform to the United Kingdom. And of course, we sold over 1 million singles, and it stayed there for 6 weeks and became an international hit for us as well, earning us 8 gold discs. So that was the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards' first big experience of the show business world. And it was hugely exciting. And I was with it the whole time and touring again worldwide. So we already had this in our blood, regimentally. And we made many, many albums after that. Of course, we didn't. We got 2 more in the hit parade on the way. And then it was quite a long pause where the Ministry of Defence took all the military bands, the brass and woodwind bands, away from regiments and battalions. Incredibly sad and misjudged moment, because they were also our stretcher bearers as well. So they were really, really talented people. So they took away our brass and woodwind, leaving the pipes and drums. And the pipes and drums then played, had their own electric pop group type thing, which played with the pipes sometimes. And we made a wonderful record then called Parallel Tracks, which is very advanced indeed. But to answer your question, because I'm not responsible for this one this time, Universal Records rang up, and John Cohen had a lot to do with it, the great arranger of music, and said, I want to do something with bagpipes, and I want to re-release Amazing Grace. So that was the focus for it. But when he saw the professionalism of the pipers, they came up with a whole range of tunes, which was the program for Spirit of the Glen, which it was called. And it was different, but the arrangements were lovely. The backing orchestra had all the best stuff that could be brought to it. A really professional recording. And of course it went wow, particularly on what we have here, Classic FM radio. And Classic FM played it the whole time. And so it became number one. It was the best-selling album in the United Kingdom, including everything that year. So it was another sort of wonderful story for the band. Lots of television and more touring, and a joy to behold. It was lovely. So I myself, I'm incredibly proud of our musicians and the talent, which is still ongoing. I remember saying the Pipes and Drums is almost, I like to think it was the best in the Don't Tell the Rest of the Army.
Oh, and I love that because, I mean, if you're talking military music and the essence of military music and what it should do for one's nation, I mean, that's the connective tissue.
You're absolutely. I know Amazing Grace is very important in your nation. Indeed, John Newton, who wrote the words, and you, who knew the tune much better than we did at that time. So we have a lot to thank you for. So for you, Amazing Grace was something you knew well anyway. But I was going on to say that it's a classic example, Amazing Grace, of tune that gets people at the heartstrings. I mean, it's so moving and emotional, it makes people cry. And that's why it's used at happy days like weddings and sad days like funerals, as it is in America a lot. And it's become one of these great tunes. It'll never go away. And I'm very proud to have been involved in it. And that was quite a lot of confidence going into, all of us in the band in those days to do a track very much outside the box, because we had instructions from the director of Army Bagpipe Music, who was very frightening, Major in Edinburgh Castle. And he said, whatever happens, Pipes and Drums will not play with their military bands. They play independently. So he totally disregarded that piece of advice. and now, of course, once the Edinburgh Tattoo was classic because it didn't play it on the first year because it didn't want to be seen to be sort of dodgy with the rules. But later on, of course, combined music became an absolutely vital part of the finale, at least. And combined music is what we call it, pipes, not necessarily with a military band, but with an orchestra or with a group, is one of the big, in my view, audience pleasers, because it's the great harmony and the great Highland bagpipe on top. It's just, for us, it's sort of really important.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, the pieces like Old Lang Syne and I Vow to Thee, My Country, I remember, I knew these pieces. The melodies were familiar, but I remember going to the UK for the first time and seeing a military ceremony and hearing those pieces. And I mean, it's awe. I'm in awe of hearing this, and it just, my mouth was dropping open, and it was so inspiring to hear these pieces being played with that backdrop. So the heartstring conversation you bring up is I think a critical one for military.
You have I mean, similarly, you have these wonderful marches by Sousa, which we all play, and Stars and Stripes, obviously. And I remember the first time when United States featured at the Edinburgh Tattoo, probably in any way big, was when I brought Pershing's Own and the United States drill team, my second year, which made the show for me. And I asked them to sing America the Beautiful.
Mm.
And for me, it was a hugely moving moment. And I hope the same applies to my audience. So it's tunes like that, and you've got plenty of them.
Yeah, I'm extraordinarily proud, I mean, of the music history, but I mean, we start to learn how that affects people, and the leveraging of it is always important. So no, it's
the great thing about drumming, because one mustn't forget that, Top Secret is a classic example. In our way, the Royal Marine Drum Corps is sort of our sort of military drumming. But the drumming gives a nice sort of break point between the music. And we do it in the pipes and drums with the drummer's call, for example, as you're aware. And so I think drumming mustn't be forgotten. It's just such an important part of the whole musical scene.
Right, right. So last couple of questions here to wrap up a little bit. You've seen music ensembles from around the world. I mean, you've seen new ones, you've seen old ones. Are there any groups that you think folks should be on the lookout for coming up?
Well, are you talking about Edinburgh or just generally?
I think generally speaking, I mean, what type of groups would you say I think everyone should see this group or keep an eye out for them?
Well, I think I haven't done a sort of producer type traveling for a long time, but I think the world is the producer's oyster, and I still think there's an awful lot to discover, but people have got to find the time to do it. I went out for 3 weeks, and sometimes I missed. For instance, I brought the Korean band, the South Korean band, to Edinburgh, and a 1,000-year-old band with astonishing costume, absolutely mind-blowing costumes. Music was different, but the mind-blowing costumes, simply wonderful. To answer your question, I feel that if I was in the hot seat now, I'd be exploring more of South America. One of my great regrets after our small foray down with Argentina, many years ago now, the Falklands War, which was one of those wars that no one wanted to fight. And one adores the Argentinian people. Every time I've been down there, I've been treated with great respect and friendliness. And I regret not inviting the great band of the Patricios Regiment, which has never yet featured at a tattoo up here in the West. And they were brilliant, spectacle and music all together good. And there were many, not little, that was big, but other groups around South America. I think South America is yet undiscovered, I would say. We've had Brazil, I've had Chile, all good. But your country has got so much to offer. And when you see a big band like the Blue Devils, was it? At Basel, I saw. I mean, that for me was one of the take your breath away moments. Because when that brass turns on you, there's no chance of you sitting down in your seat. You're on the edge of your seat saying, so I think, and sadly at the moment, because music crosses all boundaries, doesn't it? Not at the moment. Sadly, I brought a lot of acts from Russia in the days before political, with Ukraine and stuff, got in the way. Russia's got some stunning dancing and some stunning bands. And I brought a couple of them. So I think that's an area which hopefully we'll be able to get back to the east. And some of those countries in the east of Europe have got lovely dancing and lovely acts. So there's so much on offer, I think.
No,
and I think, talking about Russia, I wish politicians would, football crosses boundaries, always. No one minds about football cross, but when you and I try and take our military band to not always are given permissions, which is sad, because it is the flag waving. I always used to say that send Pershing's Own with your old guard team, and you've got the best flag waving exercise for the United States in the business. your dog corps and also the drill team. I mean, fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to hear that. So last couple questions here. Do you have
on that subject, hopefully the Pentagon's listening. So greatly appreciated is the talent from your military. I would hope that in the future, the Edinburgh Tattoo and tattoos like it will be able to invite more talent from the United States military to come and play at our shores. Because as I say, it's just a superb flag waving exercise. And some of us sometimes need it.
Well, I agree. So great conversations about traveling and music. Do you have a greatest musical memory?
I do. I have to say that when I heard Amazing Grace played to its first audience with the military band of pipes and arms in my regiment, that was probably the first and most impressive moment, because we discovered something new. It was going to go, it was just going to go on, and did. And the second, I'm going back to Russia here, sorry, was we did a tattoo. I helped run a tattoo on Red Square on Red Square called Kremlin Zoria, with a producer called Vitaly Mironov, who's still around, and the tattoo's still going on, slightly different, which I won't bore you with. But Kremlin Zoria in 2007 had 300 pipers and drummers from around the world, not just Scotland. It had 800 musicians from Russia. Included in it were invitees from France, who'd never been there since 1812, and Germany, because of the two world wars. So it had emotion behind it already. And the finale was conducted by the great Valery Kalinov, General Valery Kalinov, who was probably one of the greatest directors of music I ever met, and was killed in the Black Sea on their way down to Afghanistan, sadly with musical people on board.
That was the plane crash, right?
Yes, the plane crash. And Valery became a great friend. We all greatly respected him. He conducted the finale in a way I've never seen done before, because he had more than 1,500 musicians. And he started with Amazing Grace, went into some Russian folk tunes, including Carnival is Over, which is very familiar to us, which is Russian, and ended up with 1812, most of which had not 1812, but the rest of it had the pipes in it. And that was an absolutely breathtaking moment with the domes of the cathedral behind, St. Basil's Cathedral behind. And that was probably about one of the most breathtaking moments I can remember.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Are there any personal or professional projects on the horizon that you're currently working on?
Well, I'm very keen to continue to act as advisor consultant, and once this ghastly pandemic has left us soon, I hope, I will be hoping to do a bit more traveling and to help as much as I can with future tattoos. And may I send my best wishes to you in all you're doing. And I think I cannot, I've never understood why Washington could not have a massively wonderful tattoo there. It's a perfect place to do it. And all good wishes with all your plans, and love to help in any way possible.
I really appreciate it, Sir Mel. You've been a gentleman and such a great friend, and honestly an incredible mentor for me. I remember meeting you the very first night, and you knew my name, you knew who I was, you knew what instrument I played, and that left such an impact on me personally, spiritually, and emotionally that I just have to say, like, that it's such an inspiration for me to be able to speak with you and work with you and have the relationship I do. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everything you provided for me over my career.
It's been an enormous pleasure and great to speak to you this morning. It's a real highlight. I've been here now, sort of what we call isolated here.
Exactly.
4 months, so it's been really lovely to speak to you this morning, and great to chat about my most favorite subject with you.
Fantastic, my friend. Well, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Everyone have a great day. Greetings again, everyone. We just wanted to take a second to say thank you to Seif Studios for their creative media. If you want to find out more about Seif Studios, look them up on www.seifstudios.com. We'd also like to say thank you to our educational partner, ProLogix Percussion, American-made drum pads. They're doing a special discount code for our listeners today. So if you go to www.prologixpercussion.com and type in TWT20, you will receive 20% off your entire order. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and please check out our supporters.